Sorry I was running a little late today. Guys, a few minutes to get here. I had to go pick up my honk, and I was going to show that off to you today. I'll probably just put it on screen and show the writing on it, because it actually has some spiral writing on it. The first sound is here. Now this conch is supposedly old, supposedly from the Ice Age period. It has been studied, and it is starting to calcify, as you can tell. It's, getting old. My cousin, Mr. Wright, he worked for NASA as an advisor. He examined this shell in, I want to say 1974. And he also had done work with the Crystal Hedges skull. He was the individual that figured out that, you hit the skull with a laser and it shows all of this information, dot matrixed into the crystal. So he also studied this shell and the writing on it. It was determined that the writing, these little spirals on this shell, were made with some sort of a drill. Rudimentary drill, but a drill. And there are several little spirals and cuts. These were all made during the Ice Age. There's another one there. I'll get it into the sun so you can see it a little better. A little spiral. And the bottom spiral and this pair of little dot and a cut there represent the woman's name who collected it. So these three marks are her name. And then these three marks were her tribal name, what they called themselves. So that's the example of it. Yeah, thank gosh I still have it in the family. So the woman's name who supposedly collected this was Aria. Sounds like Maria without the M. And it meant song or to sing eloquently. And then the supposed name of their tribe at the time, or their people, was Kokle people. Grandmother said it sounded like croquet, but without the R. So Kokle people. So yeah, this reportedly is as old as my grandmother claimed. At least that's what they were able to confirm with the testing done on it. It has started to mineralize. That's what this red stuff is in it. So yeah, it's evidently as old as my grandmother believed. So that's the hereditary piece that came down through the Maya side of my family. It was handed to my native grandmother when she completed the training, the story training from her husband's side of the family. When you marry tribally into another tribe, you're obligated to learn that lore, and then you are to teach your child not only your lore, but your husband's lore. Same the other way around, if an unusual woman, different tribe woman comes, you still have to honor their ancestral lore, because that's where they come from. So that's how I was able to get this, because it was direct inheritor. So the lay of the land at the time, Uh, this is kind of a bad drawing, sorry. But this is a tip of California over here. Grandmother said it was very wide, thick, and the waterway wasn't as high up. This is what modernly would be the Gulf of Mexico. But because there was so much ice, there was ice fingers that came down into the United States, and then one that fed the Mississippi. The point that we call Florida almost touched the upper part of the Panama Canal area. All of this lower area was actually far higher landmass, and some of these areas are now underwater, but they were islands at that point. So you could literally walk across the midsection of the planet for the most part, according to my native grandmother. She said, with the exception of the fingers of ice that came down and the major waterways that you would have to pass, you could literally walk around the planet. You didn't go over the polar caps. There was no point. You couldn't survive there anyway. There was no food. Nothing grew on it. And animals didn't go onto it because there was no food. You know, if there's no grass to eat for an herbivore to munch on, there's no reason for him to be in the ice. And so the other thing is the animals, the flora of the time. She said the planet was more dried up, even though there was, less water. The foliage that was there was more scrub and more like big grasses or bamboos, and a lot of like savanna type terrain. So if that's true, then our landscape was very different at that time. She also claimed that there were woolly mammoths and mastodons, saber-toothed tiger, another little thing that looked kind of like she said, kind of like a cheetah and it was dark. She said it looked more like a prehistoric bobcat. Some of them, the further south you got, the darker they got. More like the black jaguar, but still with the bobbed tail. And she said the further east you got, they also turned dark. But they were in this area, they still stayed tan for the most part. Let's see. There were dire wolves, bears, bison, antelope. What else did she say? Reindeer, camels. There were actually camels. And some sort of a rhino described thing. She also claimed that the pottery from this region of the United States that shows natives riding dinosaurs and stuff happened during this 30,000 year period. It's when, well, we were surviving and the things that we can handle, we handled. There were also wild horses, according to her. So we had quite a selection of things that were somewhat docile. Our biggest predator at the time, she said, was the Smilodon. The saber-toothed tiger really liked to munch on us. So that was a predator we had to watch out for when we were out hunting. And grass fires were a big problem during, the drier seasons because any kind of, as she said, the reports were, the lore was that you had to make sure that your fire was in a very dry, arid, clean area, or you had a high chance of catching grasses on fire in the dry season. And that's also when she claimed that we learned to grind okra rock to put our fires out with, and that we learned it from the bigger people that lived closer to the ice. So what she described was that we had trade routes. We lived here in this area, and this shell was actually collected from a position approximately in this region, but it's probably under 500 feet of water right now. It's under the ocean. Where where they lived is under the ocean currently. And she said that they lived in like stick huts that were covered with mud. They only had a few stick or bamboo grasses that they could use. So they would use grass thatch roofs, and they would build either a round or a domed home, and they would clay it in to add protection from what was around them. And in extreme cases, they also went higher up. They would dig into cliff sides, or they would clear rock and dirt out from underneath major rocks and mud brick in homes. They learned to make mud bricks during this time too, supposedly. So, kind of like the way, you know, New Mexican Indians, Arizona Indians, kind of like they live, is similar to the way this tribe supposedly lived. And that, makes sense. She said they traded back and forth and up the Mississippi riverways, because she said the river was so wide that the islands in the middle uh, made it almost divided. Uh, don't understand that. I don't know the land lay of that area well enough, but, geologically there might be some information of that. And then this area, getting through it, uh, basically it was just a really, really wide river. Even though it was salty and this was all salt water, she said it was more like a big river. So let me get on to any questions. Oh, thank you for the comment on the drawing. Monkey Man! Oh, awesome, Monkey Man. So I got a Bigfoot joke for you. What do you call a Bigfoot hanging around in a tree with a bunch of guys in suits on the branches? Well, he'd be the branch manager, wouldn't he? Oh, I'm glad you like my content, guys. I know it's not the kind of approach that most people go for with cryptids, but I'm not really that kind of person. I'm more interested in, presenting my family history and trying to explain what had been explained to me, so that maybe overall we have another view, another angle to look at things from. So all of this area, it's also like Africa. Most of Africa was completely clear and clean of any ice. And I suspect that's probably why we can find more, evidence, physical evidence or bone evidence, etc. Because whereas most of our evidence is either underwater or it wasn't relevant at the time because of the ice. And I think the latest find concerning the human trackway and some of the information about humans, Native Americans being here 30,000 years ago, I think that was found here in this area in New Mexico. My grandmother said there was a major tribe that lived in this area that controlled the trade route up here, because there were a lot of creatures up here that lived and fought against whatever came off the ice. She said that the volcanic holes in the ice and venting areas that were across it, that was another reason why they didn't get on the ice a whole lot, was because when they got up in those regions, there would be like geyser oases that had life in it, but there was stuff that had, dug its way out of the ground, supposedly. And they were usually very big. A lot of them were described as giant-like or troll-like. Some of them were considered more like giant yetis that were white in color, or Bigfoot, what you think of as Bigfoot and white in color, but they were all either cannibalistic or, they liked people for dinner. So we stayed out of the out of their way as much as we could. And the cryptids of the time, because there were still cryptids, they lived in these high mountain areas. Like this was the Rockies range. She said that didn't ever get iced up, but these people would stay in that area and kind of guard us from anything coming down in here. And the same for over here, and the same for this region, which is your upper, what that'd be right around New York, Pennsylvania. The She said it was during this time that the Greater Lake Superior and whatnot happened. That's where they were created. It's where those fingers came from. It was when the ice receded and pulled back, it made those lakes. And there's a lot of bizarre stuff that's still still seen in that region. And then you've got her stories about what she called the Delta people of the Mississippi. Everything in this, she said it was more like the front Delta area of the Nile. She said there were a lot of islands and marshes in this region, and that there were, probably what you call a skunk ape now. Then, but she said there were also other things like sloths and, kind of more arboreal, big stuff that was in what we now know as the Everglades regions. And she said those things were very deadly to us as well, and that we tried to avoid those areas. I think, I, th- yeah, and she said it's in the coffee belt, and that's why I put the picture of the coffee belt up. I think it might have been Panama Island chain that she was referring to, because she said there was another finger of like islands and stuff. So there was like two lines of them, and one big island that was massive. I think that would probably been modern day Cuba now. So I think from what she said, they use some rudimentary flotation devices. Not only did we use fire in the huts and we had tools and we did a lot of fishing, we also used grass boats, she claimed anyway, reed boats, and sometimes we'd put a hide in them to make them more watertight to get across areas and around areas to, uh, trade, etc. And she also claimed that in certain places where it was more difficult to pass and you might be fighting a current, we would dig into cliff sides. We'd make caves in cliff sides, and we would moor our boats on pegs, and then pull them up trails around the edges of some of the oceanic areas. And I don't know if there's any evidence of that sort of thing left, but if it is, it's all probably under the ocean at this point, and something that we'd have to actually intentionally look for. I don't think we'd find it by accident. And then, here in what would have been the Texas area, uh, and this actually, she said, had a dip kind of in this way that was still land. There's a dinosaur trackway along with human trackway that's preserved in rock. So, that suggests again that her stories may have been, had some truth, historically, something that we can actually maybe also find geologically. And we lived tribally in small groups. She said it wasn't, we didn't live in huge bands or groups. She said most families were 20, 30, maybe 40 people, and that a bigger tribe would be maybe 200 or 300 people. And it was always a cooperative living style. We always watched each other's backs, and we always foraged or collected together just for safety. And when we did do hunting parties, it was, all the men would go and only a few would stay to protect women. So that was a dangerous thing in those days. According to her, we learned a lot of our trapping skills during this time to prevent the loss of our people because of bigger predators. So we relied a lot on traps and fishing to stay away from, the bigger things that were around us that would come through. Camel was a good part of our diet, and the bison. We utilized a lot of that, and reindeer. She said people that lived in these northern regions went after the reindeer more than the lower lands. And then, it was always elephant, the mastodons and what have you. In fact, mastodon, we found a mastodon tooth here in Eugene, Oregon in the 80s. So we know that the mastodon were, high up in this region. And there's also evidence of mastodon and other elephant breeds here on the west coast in California and down on that finger area, Panama, or not Panama, but the Baja area. They found T-Rex all through Texas. There were T-Rex. There, so the same kind of territory seemed to be taken up by the later mammalian critters that came along. You might be right, Bonnie. Uh, I was 10 when my grandmother told me this, and your memory is a little different after 50 flipping years. So, and she didn't go into a huge amount of detail. We only spoke for about 3 hours on this. And I asked a couple of questions a few days later. As I was thinking about things, I asked her what kinds of traps we used. She said fishing nets and cage traps for crabs. We made a tube cage for crabs, kind of like some of the fish traps or crayfish traps that the natives make. We made a trap like that for crab, and then we had the netting that we did because it was very easy to hand net. She said it was you'd hand net, throw the net in, and you'd pull fish out of the ocean all along this inner bay area. And we had relations that, were all along this region, and we had marriage ties to people up through these regions as well. And I knew several of those tribal names or people's names at one point. I think she wrote them down in a notebook. I haven't found the notebook yet, and I haven't been able to recover those out of my memory yet. So I'll keep working on that. So, I thought you might be interested in these few little things. And then, I also have a saber-toothed tiger, um, broken tooth from a later period at 20,000 years. And that was collected, she said it was at the receding finger of the center finger of this ice, and it was in the flats of Texas. So that's a story probably for next week or maybe Wednesday. So the lifestyle that she described is very much like, these Bigfoot people, the Sabe, the way they live. They utilize small traps, leg swing traps for deer, pit traps, snares, little grass traps, all simple hand forging traps is the same stuff we used at this time. And then it was because of the things that she described about how we lived during this time at 30,000 years ago that led me to believe that the Sabe, the Bigfoot, our forest brothers, they never stopped living that way. They just kept foraging the same way. She also described using like a little fish weir where you put sticks in the water. You know, you stick a whole row of them down so the fish can't get out, or you put them in reeds so the fish don't see them, and you create a false door so the fish will swim in through a little crook, and then they can't see their way out again because when they turn to look after they've fed, they can't see the exit anymore. It's a confusion trap, so you just come along and you pick them up out of the trap. You can put those in the middle of rivers too, like to catch them coming back downstream or getting caught, in the flow, and then they won't get out as easy. But usually those kinds of stick traps were put in the edges. That was something I was also taught to utilize before I went out on my turnout. I was expected to learn these ways of surviving. Hand killing an animal and peeling the skin. Uh, how to tickle a fish, how to catch a fish without using anything. Hand catching a fish without even a stickware. Those things you have to learn first before you're allowed to go to the next step where you start creating your own devices. So the first 4 months of my turnout, everything I did was without tools. Absolutely no tools. I was allowed to use a stick to dig with. Other than that, no tools. So you learn a lot from doing that. You learn to watch when something is ready. You learn to notice when the ground is moist, so it's easier to get to your food if you're digging a root. You learn to pay attention to the time of day because, different animals move at different ways during the day. Sometimes they go to drink in the morning and they'll forage in the afternoon, or they'll bathe, like a bird will bathe in a certain area. So you have to learn to be in the right place to grab the animal. And, rabbits, you have to grab them from behind. You can fake them out because their behavior when they come up out of their burrow, and, you put a rock or two over their exit point so they can't get out. And then you wait on the backside of their berm, and when a rabbit comes out of their berm, first thing they do is they yawn, they close their eyes. So you reach down, you grab them by the ears when their eyes are closed, but you only have just an nth of a second to do it. And then, you got to you flip them over to break their neck, and that also guts them, and then you peel them. So that's the native tradition way of dealing with live catching a rabbit. And you have to be careful because if he kicks you, you're going to get filleted because they kick like mules and they have very sharp claws. So you have to be careful of that. Deer, I was expected before I went out on my turnout, I had to be able to run down a prong buck. I had to be able to touch its antler or hold its antler for at least 2 or 3 steps before I was allowed to go on my turnout. It took me a while to get that one down. So you had to have stamina. My mother also taught me how to run in the desert and carry a load. There's a certain way you have to run in order to maintain a step and not stumble. The training that I went through just to go out on my turnout was sometimes kind of intense. I also had to learn how to climb 50 feet of sheer rock face before she'd let me go out. Because she said if I slipped somewhere, I might have to climb, 20, 30 feet back up. And I better have the grip strength to do it and the knowledge to know how. Let me see what your questions are here. Oh, the shell was from this region in here. It would be like let's see, that'd be Mexico area, New Mexico area, but about 500 feet underwater today. So it would have been in this little soft sand area. And that's why these people were called the bull people, because this was thought of as a big water bowl. And then some of the other names translated were relative to, like, the flatbed people, were all the people that live along this flat area here. And it's the original names. I can remember the translations and the locations of them. We were the bowl people, they were the flatbed people. And this is also where the Wachugi and some of the other people came from, where the cryptids came from originally. So, and then the Comozotes people, they were southern region. They were part of this probably Mexico City would have been sitting somewhere in this region in those days if we were to compare it, or maybe over a little more. And I'm sorry it's not the greatest drawing, but at least it's something, I guess. Unfortunately, the reason why I have to give this knowledge away is because there wasn't anybody else that I could hand this information to. Um, and at this point, I'm struggling with the concept of, do I put this in a museum or do I hand this to a family member with the story and the names? As I do have a family member who is interested, and they do have children, but I don't know how long they might be able to retain the object, and that concerns me. So I'm still struggling with an idea of what to do with this thing and where to house it once I'm gone. That was something that was left up to me to try to figure out, unfortunately. Oh, and according to my cousin, the creature in this shell is still in it. It was never pulled out and eaten. So its trap door is closed and it's, dried up inside of this shell. And this was something we supposedly ate. This was one of our main food sources other than fish, was supposedly this conch. I don't know how accurate that is, but it'd be interesting to know if it was edible or not. Uh, she said it claimed it was poisonous, but I don't know. Um, I don't know the species. I can't remember off the top of my head what species it was. So yeah, the next steps that I learned was, how to make a clay pot, how to make my own tools, how to, do the basic weirs. And, I did it in steps over approximately 7 months, going from, no tools to rudimentary tools and then into making bows, arrows, clay pots, glazes for clay pots, stuff like that, and learning how to identify clay that's safe to utilize. Because there are some clay deposits that are radioactive, and if you eat from the clay pot that you make from that stuff, you will die. There's a problem with that up north in Washington. A lot of the clay up there actually is tainted with materials that are not healthy for you. So if you're dealing with clay, a way you can test clay, and I do it usually in the water source that I find clay in or clay bed near. Take a stick, and it's usually gray clay that does this. Gray to charcoal color clay into your lighter tone clays can do this. So you get the stick wet and you get a good glob of the clay. Then you go to the nearest water source, you find a calm spot that's not fast moving. And you dissolve the clay, rub it on a rock or something, and see if it looks like an oil slick, or if it shimmers, or if it looks like you're swirling paint in a bucket that has reflective paint. So it'll look kind of marbled and it'll swirl darker and then it'll have a lighter and it looks kind of unusual, that usually has material in it like barium, uranium, or radium, and you don't want to make any pot out of that. In some cases, the clay will actually glow under black light or under certain lighting conditions at night. Radium will actually retain sunlight and glow for quite a few hours at night. So another way of testing your clay for radioactivity before you use it is to see if it glows. Usually, though, you end up finding more uranium or barium than you do radium. Radium, I think, is a more European clay-based problem than here. But I could be wrong on that. I'm not a geologist. Yeah. Um, so when uh, when my grandmother started telling me about the different kinds of tribal people that they had to live around and what they looked like, and the fact that some of them, were dog people, and she made a distinction. She knew there were wolves. She claimed, there were big wolves, and that would be what you call a dire wolf. But she also claimed that there were upright walking wolves. In addition, she also claimed there were the Wachugi people, some of the other cryptids that we currently know or we're learning about, and that there were also bears and bear people. And on that note, I think modern researchers may be having some difficulty identifying the different types of snouted creatures, because there are quite a few of them. They don't all have claws, like the Ishka, Dinaskwa, they don't have claws. But one that doesn't have a snout, which is the Gugway, because the Gugway looks like a human in the face, they're bald, they actually have claws, not fingernails. So there's some, kind of Darwin's grab bag genetics going on here with some of these critters. And they're a little hard to wrap your bean around because they don't follow, like, they fall into more like what is it, that little duck-billed thing that's got a poison spike and it lays eggs, but it's a, yeah, they fall into more like the platypus thing. They've got some very peculiar properties to their body structure, some of them. Bear people, like the ones that I've been tracking, bear woman actually looks very much like a bear, according to the myths. The one that I saw up in the den, up in the tree, the bear home that I showed you, I posted. I did have a picture at one point in time. I can't find it. I think it got lost on my last phone when I lost my phone. I don't think I'd uploaded it like a dummy. They look like bears in the body. They're very similar, like you could mistake them for a dog person. The only difference is sometimes the face is a little lighter color or more bare in the face, like less hair. The ears are slightly lower on the head and slightly more rounded. Uh, what's the other big characteristic that's different? Their shoulders are slightly wider than dogmen's shoulders. So, I mean, you could look at both of them and probably think that they were the same species if you didn't know one was a bear and the other was a dog. And then, size-wise, they're very comparable, though. I think bear people are slightly larger. Most of the dog people in this area range around 7 feet, 7.5. Scrape 8 if they're really big. The one that I think might be a huge dog man might actually be a bear person. I've only ever seen him at night a couple of times, and he always growls so dang much at me. I don't want to be down there with him when he's around. Um, Because he's really insistent, kind of like the dog people. He won't stop gnarling at you until you leave. He's never thrown anything at me though. But he still trips me out and I don't want to be there. Sorry, I am going to smoke, so pardon my inhalation. And don't do this. So, yeah, the Ishka, they're smaller in stature, whereas the bear people probably range on average 8 to 12 feet in height, from what I understand. Um, but like I said, I've only ever seen the one at a distance, and he was up a tree. I have tried to get in underneath that bed system a little closer, which I can do, but I don't have very much of an advantage, like looking up into it. It's so woven and so tightly gnarled that you can't see anything. And then there isn't a high point unless I go up a tree, which I have been fucking thinking about. Uh, I can't find a high enough point to look directly across into it. And I know that the young one forages in that area and below it, and that's where I've been told no and get the heck out of there multiple times. So they're not real happy with me trying to get a peek at them. But I do have a filming angle if I had a good zoom where I initially took the first picture from. If I can get him to come up out of that nest again and, have him react to me, maybe I can get a distance shot and, zoom in on him enough to see what he really looks like. Hi, pups. No, 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 no. All right, dog. Stop falling at me. So here's Missy. She wants to be in the film, I guess. So, a lot of the reason why I can look at the funny objects and the bizarre rock stacking and go, well, that's not a bear, is because, well, I've seen that sort of thing all over this West Coast my entire life. That was sort of things that we'd find all the time when we were camping in the Redwoods. You find it all up and down the Columbia River area in those campgrounds. You find it up and down the Eel River. Any river that you go up coastally, you'll find something. Anything lake-wise that you go around, you will find something. Uh, I mean, I just went on a little hopscotch route and showed you a whole bunch of different stuff. And those are, common areas that they habitually go to and they do stuff in. So part of it is you got to kind of crawl inside their mindset. So to take what I just told you about, you know, the ancient 30,000 culture, they're still living that way. They're still hand forging. They're still using basic traps. They're still using basic tools. They've never changed. So your mindset's got to be you're dealing with small groups of individuals that are surviving together, and they're doing it as a cooperative effort, tribally or family. They will have their own set intergroup communications, like the Skookum that come up here and pass through. They consider themselves owl people, and they use the call sounds of a great horned owl. And I tried to record it, and my phone doesn't pick it the heck up. So I've got to find some sort of a way of sound recording up here. So, you might have a group that is very specifically acting in very certain ways because they're tribal. That's their family's way of being. Uh, I've noticed the feeding behaviors are different with different groups. Like the Gugwe, the one that came to our ranch, it only ate crawdads, a few kinds of grass roots, uh, and some wild potatoes and carrots that it would collect. Other than that, I didn't see it eat much of anything else. It didn't go after the ground fish sitting on our, you know, mink pens when we were feeding our mink. Jen Jen would occasionally eat fish, but she'd only take little fingers full from like 10 or 15 little feeding spots, so she wasn't really robbing the animals a lot of food. She wasn't eating the entire, dollop of food. She would steal a little bit from each one. And the Gugway never did that. And it habitually would sit on the bank eating crawdad, and it would use a little holding spot. It would crawl up and down the stream and it'd throw the crawdad in a little holding spot. And then it would sit there and tear the poor things apart and eat them whole. They'd sometimes throw the heads away or, you know, eat just the center body part and throw the tail end away. And that's what I was trying to show you in that stream. There was an example of that with the head on one side in the stream and then the tail stripped on the other side. And then when he was done with his meal and he had to relieve himself, he didn't move much from the spot. He just hunkered down in the stream and did his business. I always thought it was because he was trying to keep Jen Jen in his eyesight, to keep her imprisoned and unable to leave the area. But when I found this, crossover down here that had the same behavior, it came to the conclusion it might be that species behavior, marking behavior like a rat does. Rodents will defecate on their food sources to mark them as theirs. And I'm assuming the Gugway, though they look human in the face, are more animalistic in their mindset. And they do have claws and not fingernails, which is another peculiarity that I have always been puzzled about. And then the offspring that, when Jen Jen became pregnant by him, the miscarried offspring looked like a dog person and had claws with a tail. So that's another confusing thing to me. I don't know how that genetics could be happening, other than the fact, somehow they are the same species. Then it bears to mind, what the heck kind of species are we? If any of these stories are correct, what are we? Are we like the end result of all of this mishmash? So the kinds of items you'll find, tools, you'll find a lot of wood tools, you'll find a lot of stone tools, you'll find clay pots occasionally, you'll find the knapping and the practice knapping where they're using real soft shale. And it's usually the young ones that are using the shale. And what I mean by young, let's see, so their growth rate is really quick compared to ours. And I've mapped the growth rate of two babies from birth, both guanche, both up in Washington. And then I had the chance to map the growth rate on one Oma birth. The Oma seemed to grow slightly slower, but I don't know about their birth weight or size that well. I know that he was already trying to build things by age 3. And Jen Jen said age 2, age 3, they were already learning their ABCs and learning to build stuff. So age 2 and 3 for them makes those two species usually about hip height to waist height on a human being. When they hit 4 or 5, they're scraping 5.5 feet in height. By the time they're 8 years old, they're scraping 7, 8 feet in height. 10, well, 6, 7, no, more maybe like 6, 7 feet in height. And then by age 10, they're 8, 9 feet in height. So they actually have a comparatively 2 times faster than us grow rate for their size, maybe 3 times faster. And they're really smart. They learn their language early when they're toddlers. I mean, they start immediately being educated as soon as they start moving around and they sit on their own or they start fiddling with stuff. they are immediately shown kana and started, their language lessons. And then you'll see, and they'll do that same stuff in miniature. So you'll find a bigger kana set, and then you'll find, kana set that's like 2, 3 inches in size. That's a little one doing the same thing, replicating mom or dad. And if the young ones are precocious, they usually end up with an elder sibling that babysits them and keeps them occupied so they don't run around too much. The guanche that I traded the teeth for had to be babysat because it was a very active baby. He liked to move around and he liked to look at people. He would sit on a ridgeline and he would watch people. So his babysitter would always have to keep him off the ridgeline so you wouldn't see him. So their young ones can be very curious sometimes. And that is another reason why we have some happen chance occurrences with them. Mom grabbing the kid and running out of the area, or when you see them leaving, you don't know what they might be carrying and why they might be reacting, especially if you're only seeing the back side of them, their back. Depends on where their hands are, if you notice that. So when they start interacting with you, they start proofing you. They start trying to figure out if you know anything about them. Like when I discovered all the Skockum tools, next time I went down there, all of the tools have been picked up and put away. Like, kids, get your stuff back in the toy box. Don't let anybody see that shit. That person knows. So you're going to see that too. They're going to pick their stuff up once you notice, and they're going to start hiding that from you. So the other thing, and I usually look around underneath the bushes, because typically they'll either set stuff way up in trees that had previously been on the ground, or they'll shove it up underneath a bush to hide it from you. So you'll visually walk by it because you're not at the right level to see it. And sometimes it's just gone from the area, completely out of the area. Wherever they sleep is probably where they keep it at that point. And I know that the Skockum child that we helped out in the sequoias spent 5, 6 days with him as he healed from his wounds. The bite was in his right arm, a similar area to where my left arm bite is. Here, let me show you that so you know what I'm talking about. So, a dog tearing into you. This one took 14 stitches. His bite was in a similar location, right below the elbow, but on the right arm. And I remember him complaining that wasn't allowed to play with the boys of his family while he was wounded. And he wasn't allowed to use his addle, and that made him unhappy. He didn't like playing with a girl, me, because I always wanted to build things. And he was like, I don't build things, I hunt. That's your job, you build things. So in their culture, evidently, the females also maintain some of the structures, potentially, especially the bed structures, I'm assuming. Kind of like the Native American. It's the Sioux woman who is responsible for taking care of the house and just, matriarchal system. Woman takes care of the house, man brings the food home and protects. And mom's supposed to educate, the kids, make sure they know what they're supposed to do. Same with dad, he's supposed to teach his children how to make tools and how to hunt and how to do it safely so they don't get hurt. Because if you get an infection, you get a wound in the wild. There are no antibiotic plants out there. I mean, there are a few, like you can use Oregon grapefruit and the lower stem parts for washes, an antibiotic. You can use the neem plant. It's an antibiotic, and you can take some of that internally. But it's not a high quality antibiotic there that you're dealing with. So if you get an infection, like If you were to get a rotten meat infection like MRSA, it would probably kill you in the wild, you know. So there's that to consider too. These people don't like getting injured because they know that that wound will cause them potentially to go into fever and die. So there is the possibility that some of the children that are attacked get, you know, X'd out by infection. A common thing if you don't have medical practice that's, you know, modern. And then, you know, overall, they're incredibly protective of their young ones. They will pick their young ones up and scoot. The one time my dog, Caesar, went after a young one, the female, you know, up above on the ridgeline grabbed her young one, but she didn't move from the area. She, I think, was going to snap my dog's back if he made it all the way up, because he was a bigger dog. And that's, you know, I went up after him. He was going up through blackberries to try to get to the child. The wind changed and my dog went ballistic, and he was very well trained. He never fucking did that, ever. But that day he did. Something about the musk or their scent or their human scent. I'm not sure what triggered him. But yeah, he went straight up that hillside for sure. So I was throwing rocks at him and trying to climb up through the blackberries to get him. I finally grabbed his tail, got hold of his back legs, and drug him back off that flipping hillside. We were both scratched up from that. And then I, you know, made sure break that immediately in him. I added a new command, you know, break, so he wouldn't do that again. And I had to reinforce that a couple of times. And then I got lucky. I was able to find some droppings, some Bigfoot scat that I knew was Bigfoot scat because it was red. Their scat turns red if they don't have mice or bird bones in their scat, which is pretty common to find, like the scat I just put up. You're going to find it's red during some parts of the year, usually in the spring, because as the fern fiddles, sword fern fiddles come on, they'll eat those fern fiddles, and it's high iron. And if you do the same, it will also make your scat red. So that's a way of determining scat at a glance. And I got lucky. I found some scat, and I introduced my dog to the scat. You know, it's called scent acquisition. You do it when you're training a dog to hunt something or to track something. So with bigger predators, like with cougar and bear, and with sabe, sometimes your dog will have a scent reaction. They will lay down and whimper. They will cry. They know they just smelled a big predator that can rip them a new one, and they react docile, which is exactly what my dog did. And that's how I was finally able to get through his head the command to break. You know, when you smell this, don't do it. So that's a way of breaking your dog, but you got to be able to find the scat to do it. So they don't go in a particular potty spot. They don't use a sewer system. They don't piss in the streams. They don't defecate in their streams. They don't defecate in their water. The normal Sabe behavior is just like we do. You gotta relieve yourself, you go find a bush. That's about it. So you'll find their scat wherever you'd find your scat. And then, you know, that's pretty common. You'll, kind of like the one I found out there on the rockway there. Uh, Jen, wherever she was at, if she needed to relieve herself, she just moved off the side of the trail, went up underneath a bush, did her thing, came back. And, you know, she maybe put a handful of grass over it, but she really didn't bury it or anything. I'd go around burying it. That's how I learned what her scat looked like. Because, you know, you see bird bones and rodent bones and you watch her eating, you know what comes out the other end. And then, you know, the fern fiddles, she ate fern fiddles in the springtime. And, you know, the scat turns red. My mom introduced me to eating fern fiddles, so I knew. That's the other thing. When you're on your turnout, you learn to experiment with your food. Learn what it makes your scat look like. You learn if it gives you more energy or makes you more sleepy. Then you learn what kinds of food you eat when you're out foraging. So those are other things to keep in mind. You know, they're going to forage for different things during different seasons and different times of the day. And they'll do that throughout the year. So a lot of the diet, the majority of the diet of the skookum seems to be fish. Whereas with the Oma and Guanche, it's smaller game. Ducks, uh, rabbits, um, small birds, rodents, a lot of rodents, termites. So they got a more primate-like diet. The other thing that they will go after, that the other ones don't seem to go after, is bumblebee honey and yellow jacket nests. They'll dig in the ground for those, just like a bear would, but you'll never find claw marks. And you'll find that they're after the honeycomb just like a bear is, but you won't find any bear track evidence. And it won't be like a bear does. A bear will rip an area out and they'll rip the whole comb out and you'll have like a hole. No, these things dig in like armholes and then reach in. Evidently, they don't care about the bee stings. Maybe they can't be stung through the skin. Their skin's got to be pretty thick, so I don't think they really concern themselves a lot with that. So they'll put their arms in the ground and then grab honeycomb, pull it out. So that again is not a bear behavior. A bear would just rip that up. I've seen bear go into combs like that. Like bears going up to grab a comb off a tree, they'll pull the whole comb down. If a Bigfoot goes up, you'll find maybe a handful or two, a couple of chunks taken out of the comb. And sometimes you'll find a little trail of bits as they walk off. That's the other thing. As they're munching on things like honeycomb or rotten wood, they have a tendency to like to walk. And they'll just drop the pieces. So you'll end up with a little breadcrumb trail. Sometimes they'll go on for 30, 40 feet. They'll help you delineate which path they went down. So that's something to, potentially keep in mind is when you find the rotten wood, there is the chance that you can also do some tracking because of the fact that they might be chewing it and dropping it, pulling it apart to see if it's what they want or not. And I've been able to do that pretty consistently. I know that Skookum and Guanche use fire, and I do believe the Yeren use fire. I'm not sure if the Oma use fire. Jenja never built a fire, and the tools that she used didn't indicate to me that she knew how to build a fire. But that might have been just because she was in town and didn't want to be noticed. Uh, I do know that she knew how to work leather and that she knew how to sew, and that the items that she showed me were carved bone and quite elaborately carved. And some of the symbols that were on the bone sippy cup that had been intended for her little sister were, kana and swirl patterns, kind of like the cut patterns on this thing. That sort of thing were on the sippy cup that she showed me. So I wouldn't put it past them to use fire. I know that she said that they roasted the deer and didn't eat it raw. So again, I would assume, though I didn't see her utilize fire, that her people utilize fire. So there's that. You'll find pitch trees too, wherever they're at. They'll use cedar trees. Let's see. Cedar trees and alder trees are the ones I normally see utilized as pitch trees. So they'll start a fire on the bottom side of the tree on one side and let it burn up. And the way that you can tell it's them doing it is you'll, at the top of the burn, as the tree trunk is burning, they will start ripping the bark off to prevent the fire from climbing higher. And you will find the hand marks where they pried the bark off. And I do think they sometimes burn themselves doing that. But again, they have probably thicker skin. It may not be as big a thing to them. But they will burn a tree bottom up like that to 8, 10 feet before they'll start ripping the bark off to prevent it from going higher. And the intention is to make the sap run so you get a thick buildup of, you know, sap through the wood so that all you have to do is peel that, sapwood off that sweet wood out, and you got a candle right there. That those peelings will burn like tinder. I mean, they're great. That and dry wood, the rotten wood with a high phosphoretic white phosphorus rot in it. Now those kinds of tree trunks will glow at night that have high amount of phosphoretic rot in them. In this area, they'll glow blue, green, or yellow. And we also have several types of bugs that glow at night here on the northwest area of the United States. We've got, you know, your little glow bugs that fly around at night, like you have down in any swamp area. Those are up north of here, towards Portland area. And then in southern Oregon, you've got, uh, let's see, I've seen glowing beetles at night and glowing spiders. Beetles are typically green, the spiders will be blue. And then there's some sort of a caterpillar, I don't know what it turns into, and they're about 2 inches long and they glow green at night. And you'll find those down around Roseburg area. But I don't know what the species are. And I've looked for glowing bugs in the flippin' dictionaries of entomology, not finding it. So I don't know what those critters are. And locals know about them. It was locals that showed them to me. Up here in this valley, out Marcola area, you'll find a lot of phosphoretic rotten stumps. And I think it's critters living in those stumps or eating things off those stumps or being around those stumps that actually probably make them glow. I don't know for sure, but we do have some glowing critters here too in this area. And they're you got to get up in the 500 foot to about 1200 foot range to find them. So they're not something you find on the valley floor. You find them up in the lower mountain areas and the hilltops. Um, so let me see if are there any topics that you guys would like me to go into more? I know that, getting into the psychology of these things, you really have to start thinking about them as not animals, because they don't roam around in groups like chimpanzees do. They separate during the day. The men will usually sleep during the day so that they can forage later in the night, and they usually don't stop foraging until 3, 4 in the morning when the light starts to come. Then they go sleep. The females, they forage during the day with children, so they go to bed early at dusk, and they'll stay down, or they'll sometimes they'll switch their routine, because that was something else. Jen, kind of like we do. If we want to stay up late, they'd stay up late. If she wanted to do something at night, she just stayed up later and went to bed later. So they don't seem to have the same kind of routine that animals do, like other primates. They don't work to group together. They don't fight amongst each other over food. Everything that I've seen that they do is oriented towards gathering multiple items into baskets or rolls to be taken to and shared with the rest of the family group. So that behavior is not the same. Um, Gorillas do some of that, but they are high, vegetation eaters. They don't eat meat. These guys eat meat. They're less omnivorous than the Sabe are. Their food likings are much more to the Native American food likings. So if you want to get an idea of their diet, go to the Burke Museum if you happen to be up in Washington. They've got excellent Native American food sources on display. There's some here at the university, but go find your museums and your Native American culture studies that talk about your food groups and the medicinal herbs that Native Americans utilize. It's very similar to the stuff that these guys eat, with the exception of a few poisonous plants that they can eat that we can't, and animals. And the other oddball thing I've seen happen with one of these things, the Oma woman, the old woman that got shot, there's a fuzzy caterpillar here in Oregon. I think it's called the imperial caterpillar. I can't remember. It's yellow. It's got really long, fuzzy hair on it. It's like an inch long. And it's got a neurotoxin in it. It'll kill you if you touch it. Here's the funny thing. I caught her playing with one of those, letting it crawl across her hand one day. So I don't think they are reactionary to that. I asked her if it caused her any pain. She tingles, but she lived through it. She didn't die. I saw her the next day. So she didn't die from that neurotoxin. So I think trying to trank one of these people to try to bring them in might not work if that's a reality. Because I watched her do that, and she did that on more than one occasion. She was messing with those things. What, honey? And everybody know where the Wednesday Saturday videos go after. I unfortunately have to get up to 1,000 subscribers before I can make my videos public. It's a rule of YouTube. So, and I've tried to go around that, and I couldn't. So I can't list them open to the public or part of my members lists until I have 1,000 subscribers. So I'm sorry, guys. You gotta wait a little bit longer so you can get access to the rest of my lives. And I will definitely make sure that happens once I can. I know. Just a few more subscribers and I'd have it and we'd be alright. But that's okay, we'll wait a little bit. It's the way of things. And the things that Jen described, her descriptions of her family. You're all right, here, lay down. You okay? Come here, lay down. Come on, dog, lay down. Yeah, lay down. You're okay. Come here. I know you're not feeling like you're getting any attention. So, I guess it's my turn to be on film. uh, the descriptions of her family, what she told me. Uh, the whole community mourned, especially her family. The proceedings went on for several days. It was a drawn-out process. There was lots of prayers. And there was, the social structure. Her mother was the chiefess of that family. And she said there were, I think, 46 people in her family group, if I remember right. And that they were cooperative. The brother-in-law's family and the sister-in-law's family and cousins, they all kept in touch with each other and lived close to each other. And those were the family groups that they traded with. So her inner family was about 12 individuals, from what I remember, and then the overall, like, brother-in-law, sister-in-law, aunts, uncles, included kids, about 46. And then they had extended family that they continued, to have interactions with. But the way that she described things is it's much more like an indigenous lifestyle. They lived in a small hut area, is what, the way she kind of thought of it. They had their upside down baskets that they slept under. And then when they were cooking food, it was community affair. The elders would cook and the young would be around listening to stories, which was something that happened when they lost her little sister to drowning. They told the stories of the otter man and how the otter man might prevent the child from coming back, and the importance of creating the Otterman mask to scare the Otterman away. So it's their mindset, it's their inner um, social stories. It's very much like native lore, except it's their lore, not ours. And there might be some related lores. I'm not sure. There's potential for that. Well, thank you, Sky. Uh, it would be nice uh, to be able to get more out, but it's kind of slow going for me. I have to find the things to show you, otherwise I have to resort on drawings. And as the season goes on, I'll be able to get into different areas, and I'll be able to find other things. And after the 8th of October, the area where there are dogmen, you're only allowed into it 1 day a week. So I might have to either make my Saturday show later, or make my Saturday show a Friday show, or an early Sunday show. So Friday, Saturday, let's see, Friday anytime. Nah, maybe later. Do it in the later evening, or later evening Saturday, or early Sunday. So I'm going to need to figure that out and see which one you guys like the options of better, because I can only go into that area on Saturdays. And if I'm out there trying to figure out where the dogmen live in that area and follow the trail system that my friend learned about, it's, I think there's something like 60, 70 acres of property out there. It's going to take me probably a good solid year to get through part of where I need to be, because I'm starting on the first 20-acre parcel. I think it's actually about 24 or 26 acres in that area. A lot of woodlands, a lot of marshy lands, a lot of places, yeah, can't get across. So, it's a finger out and a finger back in, and then around the edge of the lake, and over to the other side, and down the little strip, so it's going to be fun. But I'm very interested in learning what might be in there, because I don't know enough about dogmen. I have stories, and I have the 7 months with the mountain dog man, but I didn't want to go trekking after him because of all the bear and cougar up there and not having a hand gun. I wasn't too worried about him. I was more worried about the bear up there, because that big boar was very, very aggressive, and he didn't like people very much. And he was good size. I think he topped out, the few times I saw him, he had to have been scraping like 480, 500 pounds, which is not normal for a black bear in this area. Usually black bears top out at about 320 for a male, a boar, and around 220, 250-ish for a female if they're big. But that family group was a little bit larger. And this valley typically doesn't get cold enough for a bear to go to hibernate during the winter. So in this area, you have to deal with them in the wintertime too. They aren't in hibernation here until you get over like 1,200 feet. And that doesn't happen here. If they do hibernate, it's going to be maybe a week or two if we've got a freeze, or a foot of snow all of a sudden on the valley floor. They might go to sleep for a very short period, but they do not typically hibernate in this valley. It's only where it's colder. So that's the other thing. I haven't found any bear in that area. I have found cougar. I did find bobcat, coyote, fox. That's the first thing I usually look for. What are the predators in the area? Because, you're in there walking with them. Now, you can scare away a cougar. You gotta look big. Bears, you can scare them away with sound. Bear spray, if you're lucky. Some bears don't stop at that. Some cougars don't stop at that. And I don't have a boom boom stick. So, I'll be keeping my head on a swivel, and my ears open, and my dog with me, just in case. Uh, But I suspect from what my friend was saying about, what he learned from his dogman friend, was that they also live very much like indigenous people from the description. So when I'm hearing all these, stories about things being ripped apart, animals being ripped apart, I'm kind of wondering what kind of cryptid is really in that area. Because the majority of them don't act like that here. I know that some of the cryptids in Montana, like I have a friend who's got a cattle ranch over there, and he's constantly complaining about two, three, four head, sometimes six, seven head a year getting ripped apart in the backside of, their 200 acres. And they don't know what it's doing it. They claim it's some sort of a cryptid, a Bigfoot of some sort, big thing, 15 feet tall. But I don't know what species. So that, again, makes me wonder, if there are a dozen or so here, or maybe 20 or 30 different types here in this area, and that's just the ones I'm aware of, how many other out there, and what are they really? I mean, if we can maybe mistake three or four species for the same critters just because facially they look similar, and they're not, then we may not know enough about the behavior overall to make really clear statements on anything. Because I know the only reason why I make a few clear statements is because I've been told directly that's what does this, and that's what the stories say. But in some cases we may not have information like that. We may not even have a story of what the heck we're looking at or what might be in the area. So uh, it makes me wonder what other kinds of things can be out there. Like what is it up around Fall Creek area? There's supposedly a red crawler of some kind. I know that there were stories my mom was told by native people in that area, because some of her neighbors were half-breed natives, so to speak. And there is also in Little Fall Creek area a native location where you don't go into because you just simply disappear. And it was a bluff. It's a bluff that looks out over the reservoir. And my mother drove me by that bluff, said that was where an old tribe lived, and the medicine person had not liked being exterminated and stayed in that area until their death. And supposedly, you can see that individual's ghost standing on that ridgeline. And that if you go on that ridgeline, you don't come back. Something about his magic makes you go away. And there was an incident in the 50s. Not a farmer, a hunter had gone up, and he went onto that bluff to go after a deer, and they found his gun. They found his lunch and his thermos. He'd sat down on a log to have lunch. Never took a bite of his sandwich. Never took a sip out of his thermos. The rifle had a round in the chamber. Never been shot. Never found him. Never found out him of his clothing. Never found a footprint of him. Nothing. And I think that was the last disappearance in that area that I'm aware of. I think that was like 56 or 57. Native-wise, there had been several accounts in that area, though, people disappearing. And in pioneer days, there were several accounts, people disappearing. Who knows? Let me read a few more questions. Yeah, that's learning how to survive out in the wild. Uh, it can be tricky. Like my mom always warned, she says, the terrain that you live in can cost you your life. If you slip while you're hiking, you slip down a cliffside, you're gone. If you manage to slip yourself into a river, you're gone. If you don't pay attention to the fact you've got mountain goat in the area and you're up on a cliff and they bunt you off the cliff, you're gone. And then, climbing a cliff, you stick your hand in a crevice. Does it have a rattlesnake in it? Do you get bit? These are all things you got to consider when you're living in the wild. If I lay on the ground, am I going to have a scorpion crawl up underneath my bed, get warm? Better have a few inches of stacked brush under me to keep that from happening, and a barrier of bark to keep that from happening. Or I wake up with a timber rattler curled up on me because I'm warm. Had that happen once. Wasn't a timber rattler, but it was a rattlesnake, and it was flipping on my chest one morning. It's the reason why I don't sleep on my back anymore. That's Yeah, one of those things freaking shaking his tail and looking at you like it's gonna bite you in the face. All of a sudden, you learn not how to breathe. I breathed through my diaphragm for about 20 minutes until it crawled off of me. And all the time, I'm sweating balls right there, going, I'm gonna die, I'm gonna die, I'm gonna die. Yeah, that's why you live in Alaska, no reptiles. Yeah, there aren't quite as many up there because the cold weather doesn't allow that to happen. Yeah, they don't last long. I let it crawl off of me. Unless you can somehow catch it, which I wasn't going to attempt it. I mean, it was like its head was sitting within like 8 inches of my face, so no grabbing. So what you do is you lay there, you stay absolutely calm, and don't move because I tried to, and it started shaking its tail again. And if you were lucky, uh, it will get you know too cold because I was in a little bubble cave, and it will crawl off of you. Now, you can't do that with scorpions because scorpions will still come at you. They're way more reactionary than a rattlesnake is. In fact, you flip a rock over and the whole group of little scorpions will try to nail you in the ankle. So be careful flipping over rocks in deserts. It can be dangerous. So yeah, no, you basically have to wait for the snake to crawl off of you unless you can somehow. Yeah, your pucker factor goes way the hell up. It took me probably 2 hours to calm down after that. Breakfast was late, put it that way. I almost went home that day going, Mom, are you sure? But she'd warned me, that that would be a potential. So I was mentally prepared for it, just not, actually prepared for it physically happening to me. But then I had another incident too. I crawled down off of what you call a cake rock, down a cliff. It was maybe 30 feet, and I straddled this crack, not thinking. So I got maybe 4 foot below where the crack was in the cliff, and all of a sudden I got baby rattlesnakes dumping out the hole because I had disturbed them crawling over them, which got them all excited, so they were gonna get out of their home. That was fun, because about the time I realized they're, little bundles of 5, 6 snakes coming out of this 2 inch little crack that I just crawled over, and they're falling right in front of me, down between my legs and my arms, and tumbling down the side of the cliff. I kind of froze in place, and then I took a look around and realized I was crawling through a fresh hatch of rattlesnakes, and I didn't realize it. And my mom was with me that day. It was part of my introductory. This is where you're going to be living. This is where you're going to be foraging. This is what you need to know about. And I heard my mom, like maybe 20, 30 feet behind me, go, when she saw the rattlesnakes. And, I'm looking around on the cliffside. Finally, I get it. I'm in the middle of a danger zone. And, there's little rattlesnakes hanging on the rocks, or little rattlesnakes hanging on the little brush, and crawling everywhere around me. They're not just dumping out the hole. And then I look down, they're on the ground below me, and they're in the sagebrush to either side of me. Needless to say, it took like 30 minutes for me to pick my way out, having to wait for them to fall or move away, and then move a little bit, and move a little bit, make sure I had the ability to sit there, one toe, one finger, whatever, just to let them move away, and then I waited another probably 5 or 10 minutes when I was at the bottom, just so that enough of the babies would crawl away that I could get out of there. And my mom, she was on the other end of the trail, flipping snakes out of the way with sticks, trying to get to me, because there were probably 200 or 300 of them already out of that den that I didn't even realize was there, and my mom hadn't noticed them either because we hadn't disturbed them. No, they only got one little bean, and they only got one little shaker when they're that small, if they have one at all, so you don't hear them. So, yeah, that was an experience too. My grandmother found out about that. She would have said I was a true Snake Clan member, but she was already passed away when that happened. So, there are those kinds of things you also have to be concerned about. What can you get bit by? And then Southern Oregon, we got what they call a glass scorpion. They're about an inch long. They're the deadliest scorpion in the world, and hardly anybody knows they're in the goddamn state. But I've found them under moss. Be very careful pulling moss off a rock in this state. You might run across one of those things. And they're pretty aggressive. They'll run up your arm. Yeah, my mom wasn't real happy with snakes either. She didn't like them. And they're some of them are okay. I mean, we got the little rat snakes around here. Just ran across a rat snake yesterday. Actually, it was pretty good length. Uh, and then we've got king snakes and they eat rattlesnakes. So those guys will eat other snakes, which is nice because they always go after the venomous ones. And you get down in California, you get down into Oceano area, and you end up with coral snakes because the filming company that brought in black mambas and cottonmouths and coral snakes to film the original Johnny Weissmuller Tarzan movie down there in the little swamp. Yeah, coral snakes thrive. They didn't die out. That was actually the movie that made them have to pick their critters back up after they were done filming. Because in those days, I think that was in 27 or 28, maybe as late as 32, they didn't have to pick up the critters from films that they utilized. They could just leave them behind. But after that, it was regulated because of the dangerous snake that ended up being left behind. Pythons. Do you have the arboreal type that go up trees and hang out and sleep, or are they the ones that go lowland and stay in the grass? Because I used to have an arboreal python. They're kind of interesting. Their behavior is kind of precocious. They like to get out, and they're smart enough to figure out how to get out of their cages. I catch her out of her cage all the time. I got to the point where I had to put a 10-pound cement block on the top of her door to her cage so she wouldn't get out. And it already had two latches on it, but she'd figure out how to unlatch them and get out somehow. I found her stuck in my, what was it? My sliding door to my closet one time. She'd wiggle in between the frame. So yeah, sorry, getting off subject here. So when you're dealing with these people, the psychology is you got to think of them, when you're dealing with something that's more human looking, they actually do act more human. Uh, when I was in the Ishka bed system with the Janoskwa, uh, they were sitting a lot. Uh, to me, they acted more almost baboonish, and they're slightly smaller. They're about man-sized. At least the ones up there that I was introduced to were man-sized. Some of them are bigger. And one of them up there, it looked like he had some sort of scarification or something under his skin to give him ridges or bumps, because they don't have ridges or bumps on their face, according to my mother. But they seemed a little more primate-ish in their behavior. And that's what my mother said too. They are a little bit more baboonish. I mean, they can be just as friendly as a baboon, because baboons, you can actually keep them around you. Once they get used to you, oh, you're just another being to them. And they don't get annoyed with you unless you try to take their toys away from them, so to speak. So never, fight with them over that. And, the food items, it seemed, were kind of scattered. There was some, I remember, dried roots and some bones, like bird bones and stuff. I didn't see anything that would suggest fire evidence, but they did weave shoes. They made sandals. And I know that the area I was in was more like their front door, not their main. Like, this is where one of the family groups is that is in that region. There are more groups, just this is the one that was easiest to get to and was a smaller group. I think there was maybe 8 or 9 individuals, and the rest of the group, my mother said, is up on the ridgeline behind that area and to, either side. So what I was exposed to was just the periphery group, so to speak. But I didn't see anything in their area that suggested that they were the kind of critter that was ripping anything apart. There was no chunks of body parts laying around from animals. There was no pulled feathers or any like heads or feet to animals laying around. So wherever they ate probably wasn't there, and the few things that I saw were probably stuff they brought there with them. So I don't know a lot about them. My mother did, because she did her turnout around them, and she claimed that they ate roots and small animals. They favored like squirrels and rabbits and small game. That they made the sandals. That they did use some basic tools. Don't remember her saying that they ever used clay pots of any kind. That was the urine that my grandmother grew up around. They were very heavy tool users. In both the ways my native parent and my native grandmother described these beings, that they cooperate together. They live together, and they communicate with each other about things. They coordinate with each other on almost everything. They don't do things alone. They go in pairs and sets. There's always 3 or 4 of them together. If you see one alone, you are either dealing with one that is outcast, has been shunned, or is potentially looking for a mate outside of their group. Because if they seem to be aware that birth defects happen if they mate too many times in their own family groups, so they always come to a point where they seek marriage outside their group. And that's what Jen was going through. There was nobody left in her group that wasn't a relative. So she was going out to find a husband that wouldn't be part of their family group. Well, I don't know if I go to the extent of rubbing it on me, uh, but maybe carrying it with you could do that. I know that when I have gotten into like bed systems where there's fresh scent and I get their scent on me, dogs freak the hell out. If I walk up on a dog, the dog will try to attack me. It will bark, it will raise its hackles, and it will get incredibly aggressive. So I think it depends on what scent and what animal. I personally wouldn't screw around with that because I don't know enough of what the reactions are. But I do know that dogs will freak out on you if you've got Bigfoot scent on you. I don't know about other animals. I know that my grandmother got stalked in a group of Yaren, so I don't think their scent discouraged that from happening. I mean, it tried to nab her and the young one right in the middle of the group. The group took it out. The big male broke its neck, laid the body down, and the rest of the group beat it. But I don't think the scent does anything to scare them away. It could, I don't know, but it doesn't. It didn't seem to prevent that, at least with the cougar. I haven't really seen an orb connection with Scotches. Uh, I mean, we had the orb incident near the city I grew up in, but it wasn't anywhere near her group, her family group, or her. I have heard there are lots of that sort of thing going on in some locations, so it might be that there are orbs and there are Sasquatch in the same area at the same time. There may not be any other connection other than they're occupying the same place. They may not be related. I don't think that they are, because that's the only time there was ever any an orb thing going on anywhere in any of the areas I've ever been in, was the peculiar sighting by my hometown, and that was studied by the local college there, and the military that came in and dealt with that. So, and there were no Squatch in that area. There were some other weird lights in that area. My phone is wigging out for some reason, but there wasn't any, Squatch and then orbs. So I don't know if they're actually literally connected. Maybe they just forage in the same area or pass through the same area or maybe are in the same area at the same time. Who knows? Excuse me, I'm getting thirsty and I don't want to cough. So I am going to take a sip of my juice because I don't want to cough. Uh, I've been having an allergic reaction to something in my dew van. It's been fun. So, yeah, keep in mind that they also wash their food. So, along waterways, around lake edges, you'll have to look for like vines or bundles or remnants of food items that will be like strewn along one area. And that usually will be 3, 4 foot, 5, 6 feet of shoreline. And that will give you some ideas as to what kinds of food items they might be foraging in that area, because you'll usually find remnants of plants. You'll find 3 or 4 varieties of little critters, maybe snails that you'll find, or remnant of frog, or bird feathers, and sometimes you'll find, floral flowers or roots, bulbs, that sort of thing. It'll look like a little jumble of mess of stuff that isn't anything, but when you examine that little pile, you'll realize there are multiple different kinds of items. That's always a good indication that it is a food ball or a basket, that they've been cleaning the items, and food items, so that they'll eat them later. And they do wash their food before they prepare it in any way. Hey, Jason. So keep that in mind. The other thing that you'll sometimes find in areas like that when you're looking for their food items and where they wash their food, sometimes you'll find the little ball of sponge, a little green ball of maidenhair algae that's used for the water sponge. And they'll, around 1 inch in size, they'll tend to lose them or leave them behind. So occasionally you'll be able to find those where they wash their food, because they'll realize it's wore out, doesn't work well enough, doesn't give them enough moisture, and they leave it behind. So you'll find that. Occasionally you'll find some of the cross tines to their baskets. So the cross tines will be a little stick with just a pair of grooves, like a Y cut in either end so that you can hold like vines apart. So you'll find little pins like that. You'll find this sponge ball, the algae sponge ball, and then you'll find all the different types of food sources, roots and feathers and flowers and etc. And that will help you understand what they might be collecting in that area if you get lucky enough to find something like that. I Once I find it, I've got a disc with a bunch of pictures on it that might have some evidence like that still from when I was doing research back in '09, '08, '09, '10, '11, '12. I found a lot of stuff like that up in Washington. It was pretty easy to get pictures of, and I did record some of that kind of evidence. Just I don't have those pictures available on this particular computer. It's old research, so it's in a box. Doing pretty good today. So, uh, um, also, if you've got the chance or ability to check into your local mythologies, go to your universities or anything in the area or any kind of repositories that might have, pioneer stories or native stories about what's in your area. That I've discovered helps some uh, figure out what's there. Otherwise, you have to deal with, visually confirming them or finding enough track evidence or foraging evidence that all matches. And that's the other difficulty because these people all act so much alike. Yeah, I mean, slight tool differences, that's granted, You got stone tip spears for dog people, supposedly, and you've got more wood tools for skaakum, including the addle, and boomerangs, because they do use a boomerang, some of them. So, and the little tools like the potential net pin for making spaced netting, you'll find stuff like that around. That's probably some of the easier things to find because they have a tendency just to leave that stuff lay. I don't collect it because I know that I'll be robbing them of a tool that they'll have to replace. But I do take pictures and I note that sort of thing. It's up to you which way you want to do that. But some of these people can't replace those tools. That's the other thing. It's not all of them have the same keen. The old woman's son, for instance, never could learn how to make the upside down basket that she could make. And he tried. He tried and tried and tried. He tried for maybe a year and a half, 2 years. He'd get close, but he never managed to get to tie in and to hold upright. His would always collapse. So once those structures are out, they're gone and won't be replaced. Sometimes it's the same way with the tool. Some of those tools have been handed down from grandfather, son to grandson. So if you take that tool, there might not be anybody to make that tool again. So keep that in mind as a researcher. Uh, they're not all equal. They don't always have the same abilities from generation to generation. And that's something that is also different from us. So that again makes me wonder. I know they're humanoid, and I know they've been recognized as humanoid, but they do seem to have some stumbling blocks occasionally as to what they can do. So in that area, previously they had used a foraging tactic to trap termites by stacking logs on top of each other and putting foliage over it to create a rotten area for termites to come to. And the old woman made the upside down baskets that allowed them to use them as a birdware. It gave them more protein, and all they had to do is put a juvenile in to at the bird and knock it out, because they use their ultrasound, their sonics, to knock a bird stupid. And then the bird will flip around on the ground, disoriented, not able to fly, and it lasts for 20-30 seconds. If they pick that bird up during that time, it's dinner, and that's their snack. So uh, those sorts of things allowed that group to have more protein in their diet. When the property owner went in and destroyed them, those upside down baskets haven't been replaced in 20 years. So there was nobody else left that could make those baskets that knew how. So I also consider that, if you go in and you disturb something of theirs, they may not have it again. And that may alter the way they have to live or the way they have to forage. And that again is not primate. It seems like like they're not completely developed humans in some ways. They've got it, but they don't got it. And then they are very clever. Many of them do understand our movement behaviors and our behaviors in general. They know what we do, where we do it, how we do it, when we do it. They watch us all the time, especially if you go into their territory. Don't think that there's anything that you can put in their area that they don't realize is there, because they probably watched you put it in. And that's part of the reason I also think that they can easily circumvent, cameras in some ways, because the times that I tried to use trail camera, and I hid them pretty good. I mean, I had one stuck up under foliage and curtained out, and the only thing that was exposed was the pin dot for the camera, and they still didn't go into that area. So they had to have been watching me. So, camouflaging something like you would hide it from an animal isn't going to do it with them. So they're keen enough to get that. They're also keen enough to know when your devices are on or off. And, maybe their ultrasounds, subsonic sounds might disrupt your battery. I don't know. It's a possibility. I mean, EMP is supposed to disrupt solenoids, etc., if they're functional. So maybe something in their vocal range drains batteries. It may not be a magical thing. It may just be an adaptation that they have or some ability that they have that is physical. So, let me see if I can. Oh, okay. I wish somebody would make a video telling you how to use the options on your phone, or give you the option to fiddle with this stuff while you're not live, so you can actually learn how this stuff functions. Everything I found to figure out how this works, it's all been telling me to do it on my computer. My computer doesn't have reception up here, and I don't have my phone's the only thing that gets reception up here on this hillside. So, I wish I knew more about how this program functioned. And I think because my phone's getting all woggy, it's probably getting a little low on juice, so I might have to cut this short here soon. Got any more questions, suggestions? Please belt them out now. It's your last chance. And I hope that the little bit I'm saying about, how they cooperatively work together and they babysit and they, mothers and children are together, fathers and sons are together. Girls always go with, a grandma or a mother to learn herbology or root gathering or that sort of thing. So they're very specific kinds of roles within their community that they follow. And that's something that, as a researcher, uh, might help you understand a little bit more about what you're seeing. Because a lot of what you probably find in trackways wise is probably the hunters and the men of the group either carrying fish home or trekking out to go hunting. I think that's the majority of the reason why we see mostly males in almost every sighting. If guys haven't noticed, it's mostly males that we see in the sightings. So that's got to be hunters. That's got to be them going out and doing their manly thing and providing for their family. So that's something to keep in mind if you're finding a lot of movement, you might be dealing with males, which are a little different to deal with than females. Females are a little more forgiving. That's the other reason why I have a tendency to get into the marshes and more swampy areas to get down with mom and the kids. As long as you don't get too close, 30, 40 feet is about as close as they will let you get without them going, and start throwing shit at you. But, that's a good observable distance. You can hear them eating, you can hear them moving. Sometimes you get a glimpse of them as they are sitting, and, it helps you figure out where you need to position because they'll sit for a while, doing their thing in an area, sometimes quite a while, 2, 3 hours. So when you find a spot like that, it would be easier to try to pin down where they are and go investigate the spot once they're out of it. Because they do move on, they'll move to the next spot for foraging, which allows you to go into the previous spot and take a look. What are you begging for? Are you hungry? All right, I think I'm going to have to scooch. Yeah, you're welcome, guys. I don't think anybody else has probably had very many odd experiences like this. I mean, there are people that have had some very long, sustained relationships with them, and there have been people that have written books about that, and there are individuals that have had family ties with these things for generations. Grandpa said, don't do this, or put your mash down there, or keep your grain tied up because so and so is going to come and get it. The booger man's going to get it, or whatever. So there are those sorts of people in this world, that have had generational activity, or they've got property that have had sabe on them or other things. And it's those people that will probably be able to give us the most information about what they look like and what they found on their property. But a lot of them, they want to talk. I mean, there are a lot of farmers here that understand. You go up and down this valley and take a look at the front of the farmhouse and see how many single stack rock sets you find. And it always startles me because, if you get into a conversation about those people and you ask them, well, why'd you start stacking rocks? Oh, well, my grandpa did it. Well, why'd your grandpa do it? And then they'll get real quiet. So that always makes me wonder, did your grandpa know something about the Sabe? Do you know something about the Sabe? Are you signaling to the Sabe that y'all are friends? Well, that's good. But let me in on it, would you? Anyway, those are just, some words for thought. I have no idea, but I had some very unusual experiences with some people that do that themselves in this valley. And there are quite a few, you know, more neighborly people that do seem to lay out food for the Sabe in this valley. I found incidences of that multiple times, and I'm positive it wasn't being laid out for a human, because it would be placed, no bags to be carried away, uh, out of package. Some of it home baked good stuffs that are obviously meant to be just either eaten in the spot or carried away in your hand. So that's always kind of gone, hmm, why are you some of y'all doing that? And then there's a couple of butchers in the area that butcher for local people, their neighbors and whatnot, and they'll dump bones in certain areas, and there are usually on crossover trails for Sabe. So do those people know something too? And some will complain about things being stolen out of the yard, but then go right back to replace it so it can be stolen again. Makes you wonder. Anyway, I'm glad that you guys are enjoying my content. Please feel free to ask questions. Please, please. The more questions I have, the more I can think about what to give you for information and how to get it to you. And like I said, a lot of this I have to go out, I have to find it, and I have to present it. But at least I have a good average, you know. I can do that pretty regularly because there's so much of that sort of evidence all over this area. It's not uncommon. And a lot of people, like I say, ignore it. You see it all the time. I've talked to fishermen and hunters, and I say, "Hey, you ever seen a Bigfoot structure?" And they're like, "Oh, you mean all the stacked sticks and stuff?" "Oh yeah, I see that all the time." "Well, where'd you see it?" "Oh, out where I'm hunting." "Well, where do you hunt?" "Well, that's my business." So you know how that goes. Or the same with the fishing spot. "Oh no, I never tell you where my fishing spot is." So be aware that you might have some local resistance that way. Who is radiation? Explain how they are loaded with so much radiation. Um, Depending on what you're referring to, what has radiation in it, Justin? Are you talking about the sabe? Well, if they're loaded with radiation and they happen to be eating out of clay pots that have radon in them, or not radon, but have something radioactive in it, then there might be a reason why they have radiation in their system. Because if you're eating out of a pot that's made with clay that's got uranium in it, for instance, which is all over the Northwest here, you have to delineate that before you can make a pot. Then there would be a potential for radiation poisoning. But if you're seeing a squatch with that, you're most likely also going to be seeing a squatch that has patches of hair missing. Because your hair is the first thing that falls out when you're either lead or, radiation poisoned. And, the only thing I could think of would be they'd gotten into radioactive clay somehow. Or into a radioactive area. Yeah. But that's usually only in clay beds in this area. It also depends on what area you're in. What can they environmentally be exposed to? I mean, you go further east of here and you get straight into arsenic land. You can't drink the water in some areas up in the foothills around here because there's arsenic in it. It'll kill you. And let alone, the biggest arsenic crystal in the world was found just 50 miles east of here. It's about, I don't know, a foot long, foot and a half long, something like that. About 6, 8 inches thick. I've seen it. Yeah, the sabe. Yeah, the only thing I could think of would be the potential that maybe they'd gotten into radioactive clay. Hey, Adeline. Then that would be a potential. Other than that, I don't think. Huh. Got a bot here, eh? That's going to happen. Okay, yeah. So yeah, the radioactive clay would be about the only thing I could think of that would potentially give them a radioactivity issue. They'd have to be exposed to something that would do that, just like we would have to be exposed to something. So that would be a potential. Anywho, it looks like I probably should scoot. It's been 2 hours. Um, I think Wednesday I'll probably talk about, you know, I'll announce it. Because I actually have a couple of things I want to discuss on Wednesday. I'm just not sure which topic I want to head towards first. So I will see you guys on Wednesday. I thank everybody who is a subscriber. I thank everybody who comes to my lives. I appreciate all of you guys, and I'm so glad that my information is helpful to you. And I'm glad that it might be preserved because I think it is relevant. I think the native lore that my grandmother was teaching me and that had been preserved in my family actually really is about these people, the Sabe, and that it does teach you about what they are and how they act. So I'm hoping that will help us all. Maybe we can solve this puzzle, turn this puzzle out and, enough ways that people can start to understand and conceptualize what they are and how they act. And because if you can figure those sorts of things out, it's far easier to figure out how to get footage of them. If you're not constantly running around trying to figure out where they are, and you learn where they are, then you have an advantage all of a sudden. Like in that ravine where all the rocks are, if it was legal for me to put a camera in there, which it is unfortunately not, I could get footage of whatever's playing with the rocks in that ravine, down in the creek bed. So that's something, if you find that sort of thing, or if you find like a structure, that's active, or a blind that's active, those are areas now that you can identify, and you might have the ability to put a camera in it and catch footage, depending on where your research area is, and you might end up with some really neat stuff. And I'd hope that you do, because, as soon as we can start figuring out which ones are, it'll be easier going to try to prove them, because people will be more receptive and they won't have such a mythic mindset about what they are and what they do. Because right now we're dealing more with, generalities and Hollywood mythology. I'm sorry, scare tactic mythology about them. To be honest, it seems like everybody wants to think that they're some sort of wild animal that's going to rip you apart. And yeah, you might think that when you're out there, because they do scare the living out of you sometimes. They've done that to me, but I'm still here. I'm not dead. I've never been attacked, other than, having stuff thrown at me. So, and, being next to Jen Jen, she always knew her strength. Anytime she touched me or picked me up, she never hurt me. She never bruised me. And that's something that a gorilla can't do. Gorillas can break your arm by accident and they pick you up. So she always understood her strength, like we understand our strength. And, she'd handle me like a kid, which I was a kid. Yeah, there are native tribes that did have bad relationships with them. Now, again, it depends specifically what species they are. Because if you look at my drawings, everything on those pages can be considered Bigfoot unless it's a dog man. That's a generalization. So, to find out what kind of cryptid that particular Cree tribe had problems with, you gotta figure out what the cryptid is. Probably not a humanoid-like one. Probably one of the more animalistic-like ones. And then you've got the separation of 150 years to what the people originally knew compared to what natives know now after they've gone through being on reservations, having their lore removed from them, having their old people killed off, and their young ones not taught. So you're dealing with trying to remember and or trying to keep what mythology and lore you have. A lot of it is gone. A lot of the lore is not there anymore because people have been killed out and died off. And we still have, our basic lore, but it's, kind of generalized again. We all have certain stories that are shared between tribes that are all the same concepts, and then specific tribes have very specific lore connected to the regions that they lived in. So you would have to figure out what the cryptid is in that region. It may not be what you think it is. It may not be a Bigfoot. It may be something completely else. And Bigfoot is such a general term. We all think that Bigfoot all looks the same, for one. We all think that they're 8 foot, 9 foot, 10 foot tall. And we all think that they look a patty. They don't. They all look different. The different groups have different characteristics, including foraging characteristics can be different. So, you were looking more at different species of people, races of people, if you want to say, potentially than animals. Because animals can't, like, a baboon can't mate with a gorilla. We can mate, with each other, Sabe can mate with us. That automatically puts them in our category. They're not animals at that point. At that point, they are humanoid. Just like having a chin, walking upright, that all puts them in the human category, not the animal. And then you have to deal with, they crossbreed with each other. They're like platypus in some regards, in that they're an oddity, genetic unexplainable, but somehow not only can they breed with us, but they can breed with the species of themselves across species. You know, a Gugway can mate with an Oma. A Urine can mate with a sun-faced person and produce offspring. So they don't fit our understanding of genetics. We've got a very sterilized version of us. You know, we know our genetics, but that doesn't mean that we know their genetics. It's sort of like comparing the genetics of pygmies and humans. We can't breed with a pygmy. We can't produce an offspring with a pygmy human. It's physically impossible. We don't, we aren't the same. Pygmy people, their women are able to have children at age 8, the same as Bigfoot. So potentially pygmy people are closer to other cryptids than our cryptid side of this puzzle. And I do think that humans are just another cryptid. We're an identified cryptid, but if we can mate with them, then we're just another cryptid. Then again, we can't mate with, you know, people from the Congo. In fact, that's the reason why the pygmy is dying out. They, their, their species and our species can't create offspring. And there aren't enough pygmies left that aren't related to each other. They will die out in the next couple of hundred years, unfortunately. Unless there's some way that we can create a strain connection so that we can, or that they will be able to go on through scientific help. But they're going to die out. Now, think about how many other human species, because we understand pygmies are human. We accept that, though their characteristics are different. They only live to 50 on average, is the oldest they typically get, 45 to 55. They are sexually mature to age 8 and able to reproduce as a human adult. And they have 3 hair follicles per every pore instead of 2 like ours. Those are just the basic differences. And then there's the factor that we can't create offspring with them. So either we're a sport, or they're a different species, or we're a different species and they're a sport. Uh, so those are things to consider. And we've got a concept that we think we've got it all figured out, and we only know what, 5% of anything on this planet. We only occupy, what, 12% of the surface of the world, and somehow we've got all that information figured out. I think there's a lot of wiggle room. So anyway, enough of me pattering on about my thoughts. I think you get the point. I think there's more questions than there are answers, and I think we've sterilized our answers to such a degree that we can't ask more questions without somebody freaking out and thinking it's not scientific or it isn't, logical to consider. Well, anyway, everybody take care, and I will see you guys Wednesday. And thank you again. I'm so happy I have so many people who are interested in this, and I'm glad that it's helping people understand their research areas. At least that's my hope, because I'd like to see them discovered before it passed. I don't think that's going to happen, but it sure would be nice to see, or interesting to have occur, because I think we could maybe have a different world at that point. You know, we'd have a little more reality in our world, and it could be interesting. Anyway, besides, you know, if we could learn their history, maybe they know more about our history than we do. Everybody take care, and I will see you on Wednesday.